all 6 missions. You click on a mission, you go to Video Movie Clips. You'll see the different segments that they broke down into many tiny clips. I had to grab each clip and put them together. Here you can see the list of the clips, and I put them together and made a giant edit, which I analyzed. Here's a sample beginning. You can see the running time frame at the top. You can see the name of the clip at the bottom, and a segment, the part of the mission that is listed on the site, easy for reference, if you want to grab the clip and analyze it yourself, which I encourage you to do. Aside from that, there was remaining time frames of the clips for proper analysis. You will find out why. It's obvious that this is slow motion, and then sped up. You can see the timing that was changed and a factor at the bottom, how much the length of the clip was modified. Here's another example. You can see the time frame at the top, and now the time frame at the bottom. You see them running, based on the factor change. To the one at the bottom, it's not quite straightforward. There's quite a few different time changes they used. At the top you can see the name of the current clip. You can see the name of the clip on the list, how it corresponds to the clip list on the NASA site. Easy for you to reference. What I'm showing you, go to the site, look at the clip yourself. Do your own analysis, which again I encourage you to do. I will now briefly summarize the entire analysis. I will present clips to you, categorized by mission. A11 has the least to offer, except for A12. The TV camera malfunctioned almost as soon as they turned it on. This is slow motion, hopping and jogging. It's quite extensive. Here I'm speeding it up. You will see more in the appendix if you'd like to see that the full extent. It's quite extraordinary. Notice the color changes in the footage that will be explained later, about how the footage was generated and supposedly acquired. This type of footage, slow time frame sped up, is very revealing, and almost the people get a clue that the footage is faked. Here we see an example, looks quite normal. Someone running on the surface. Seems reasonable, but when we speed that up, this is actual footage presented to us, and fairly obviously, it's slow motion. Another example seems reasonable. Look at the hopping. Try to regen his balance, and here we have obvious slow motion again acquired on the surface. You'll see much more of that in the full analysis. They also walked on the moon, not nearly as much as running or hopping or jogging, that is, but I find that somewhat more revealing, and he looks quite normal walking, except for the pops, which will be explained later, again just walking. This is sped up, you could tell by the factor change at the bottom. This is slow motion footage. And we will show examples. Here we change the length, speeding up, in other words, you can see that it looks normal sped up, and slow motion. On the moon speed that it was presented by NASA, you'll have to orient yourself to it. They are actually on wires, so that oddly to it, but still very revealing. This is spasms I noticed, quite having a few, and I suspect that it's because of the wires, but pulling them, throwing them off balance, so that they had to recover from their spasms. I had some extra events I found, so that I was very revealing when showing a modified speed. Here you can see the bottom, look at the time frame factor change. That's my analysis saying that it's normal, when there's no factor change, and this is what NASA presented to us. The gravity analysis. Here's lies prove the footage is faked. Gravity analysis of astronauts jumping is correct in NASA footage because of their combined use of wires and speed film changes. We will show quite a few examples of this. However, the analysis of falling objects and sand, quite revealing. Falling objects and sand cannot be put on wires. So they had to film speed changes that were wrong to hide the gravity that was wrong, and they had few opportunities to make it look reasonable. Here you can see it's wrong based on my analysis on the moon. I modified the speed to make it look right, and you can see that the two compare together, and the many factor change that shows that it is correct for Earth. This is one of the things. It was correct in the footage and wrong in my factor change. I realized I had the incorrect factor change for that one spot. We changed it just for the small portion so that the object is falling. You cannot tell. It plays clearly. Another example. It's wrong in my factor change. I modified it just when the object falls. You cannot notice. You have to see that the factor change at the bottom. Same analysis for sand. Lots of opportunities. Wrong in the footage. I modified by this factor at the bottom to make it look correct. And then my modification, factor change for the Earth speed. It is correct. And just don't have a few examples of this. Be prepared. And of course, you can look at the clip for reference and go analyze it yourself. Here you can see the astronaut jumping when the sand falls faster. Only a few examples where the sand was falling in the same. The astronaut was jumping, so I mentioned speed change quite a lot. There are speed changes events, which are the moon's multiplied speeds used in the clip. Here we see sand astronaut running away. Did you notice the fake that I used several speed changes? Here is an actual footage. It looks reasonable. He's moving fast, but watch. He will suddenly go in slow motion. That was presented to us by NASA. Here I found it because I used another time factor, he looks ridiculous, and then looks normal back there. Several different film formats were used in different aspects of the entire hoax. I believe the TV footage was actually captured on 16mm film, and then recaptured by a television camera. This is an optical printer, quite used extensively in the hoax, in different aspects, but an example of how a camera is pointed at the projector is projecting footage and the camera recaptures it at a different speed. Here we have an example of it. An A114 frames, slow motion, and then you can extract different frames at different patterns to create different FPS pieces of film. These are all the factors I have deduced were used in the footage. It's possible different ones were used, but I found that these good enough. This is a model of the set. It was used to capture the footage. You can see that a backdrop, very large moon surface reproduction set was used. Possibly 300 meters in diameter. This is an opportunity for enterprising science students to analyze the footage for themselves and deduce what size was in each instance. There was quite an extensive program conducted by Apollo to capture high-detail image of the landing sites. In fact, an intelligence service, NGA, has been developed out of this. Here's a Bell computer model of the surface using the footage, and I was quite accurate and extensive. Here we are, a POV of the set model. I am showing clearly how it had a backdrop. Analyzing photographs and footage captured by the astronauts and the TV cameras, we can see evidence of these sets that were used. We can find evidence for it, the use of sets. These are panoramas provided by NASA, photograph joined as the astronaut danced in a circle. I call it the panorama dance. And actually, because of the overlap, we can also extract stereo images and analyze stereo images. We can also see that there is a point at which the set stops and the backdrop begins. And this is also because of the limitations of stereo photography allowed and not easily deduced as a set. Or it could be claimed as the limits of photography itself. As we further go, talking about the wires and entraining and the balance between counterweight versus frame speed. And when we analyze the footage, the test footage, it will more clearly match the modified NASA footage of Earth than it does the simulator footage that we see here. Because of the low gravity, friction was reduced, and you don't see much of that in the NASA footage. In fact, the extraordinary abilities granted by such low gravity are hardly discernible in the footage. And then we will look at the footage that somewhat reveals the use of wires. One wire at the top, there are the equations that show the counterweight necessary depending on the frames per second footage used. There's a lot of footage captured by the lunar rovers, photographs as well as DAC camera footage. Here we see the stabilized and sped up. It looks normal. The moon buggy looks like it's on an Earth set. Here again, it's sped up, and it looks like someone's driving fast on a set. It's also quite possible this was a model. More analysis will be necessary to determine which is which. But they had some fancy setups with a simulator, sometimes on a set. An example here, you can barely see the lunar rover, the same model. There it is in the middle. They had a flight simulator setup with a complex modeling of the sun, matching the generated footage. And all of this is supported by NASA's capabilities, which we will show later. This is a model of a snorkel cam, and of a, quite possibly, they had stop motion animation with a camera inside a model. Look at how tiny that model is. And look at the footage generated. This is extraordinary stuff. I find it incredibly beautiful. This is John Dykstra, the mastermind behind Star Wars, who trained under the mastermind behind the Apollo footage, who I claim was the mastermind. But look at this incredible footage. That looks real to me. And this is all made from computer-controlled cameras and a tiny, tiny model. I believe they use larger models, the moon simulation of the Apollo hoax. But these tiny models show extraordinary results. And this is a computer-controlled animated camera. This is a fighter pilot flight simulator camera flying over a model. And they actually used the same technology to train the astronauts for the Apollo missions. That's a moon model with a flight simulator, live, real time. Flight simulator camera. This is actually a lunar rover simulator, same build. They had a camera, here it is, running over a model of the moon's surface, which they actually accurately modeled. The surface they would be driving on, they had two cameras, two views with one camera. And look at the camera. It is going up and down as if the car is reacting to the surface. Quite incredible technology, not utilized there nearly as well as it was in the hoax. They had a complete setup, giant circular moon models, and they got more detailed for closer landing. This is all set up for simulated landing. They had a giant simulators. They utilized real-time cameras run over these models operated by the astronauts. This is an accurate topographic model of the moon, which is highly detailed. It was actually used in a simulator. You can see how large it is, and I believe this is a small compared to the models they actually used in the hoax. Here is an example of it being utilized in a simulator. These are just photographs from the simulator. They're quite extraordinary, and you'll reference footage later to see how easily that it was utilized. This is the man I believe responsible for the visual effects, Douglas Trumbull. I will show you the brief history. There's plenty of information on the internet about him. I just mostly wanted to introduce him. We have a landing footage. This is specifically Apollo 12. There was a dust blast. But on Apollo 14, they kind of screwed it up. You can see the difference in the lighting in the craters. Because before the dust hits, it's a model. And after the dust, it's the set. The lander was on. This is mission control. Very few there even knew it was a hoax. Only the astronauts were allowed. Only astronauts were allowed to talk to astronauts on the moon. They were all in on it, as well as the camera operator, because obviously the camera was recording, not live operated, and as well as agents. Only a few agents in mission control. Gravity analysis is obviously the most important, but I think some orientation is necessary if you understand what's going on when you look at the footage. A good place to begin is the moon's surface. Obviously no atmosphere or water, which of course means no plant life. The brightest photography, apparently stars aren't visible. No water also means no erosion. There's erosion disappearing. And of course, you end up with rocks and boulders and so forth. And craters, no craters in this view, but you can clearly see the simplicity of the surface also allows for the easier simulation of the footage of the landscape. TV cameras were used. This is a TV camera on the rover. It actually is quite large. You'll see some footage with this astronaut next to the camera, but it has used the rotating disc of red, green, and blue. And capturing 3 scans per frame, actually. And you end up with this kind of rainbow look to it. When all 3 colors are present at the same time fully, you end up with white. With none, you end black. Mixture of colors, mixture of intensity. Could give you gray of the colors themselves if they're separated. The slower it goes, the more you can see. The faster it goes, the kind of images, this blurry image. This is what today's film photography usually is made of. And television cameras are HD, and so they have a lot of this as well. Not as much as on the scan, as much as progressive, which is image after image. This is what many of you are used to at this point when you saw NTSC video. You would see odd scan lines. And even scanned lines, and as the object moved, you see the separation. They call it combing. And this is an exaggerated version, so as you can see it more clearly. Sometimes there is a little blurriness, a glow, and a residual image, and so it softens a little bit. It's a little more bearable. But you can also see the style of motion blur here. If we have our simulated shot of the moon, you can see what it looks like. This is much more refined. You can barely see the scan lines here. This seems like it should have been the preferable way of capturing moon footage. but design demanded the hoaxsters to use the progressive red, green, and blue. And that will become clear later. Here's that refined and with the glow and residual image. It provides this kind of trail that softens the effect. And of course, they have it simulated. There it is, just a shaky camera. Now we show rainbow motion blur. When we separate the colors, you can see what happens. This is a disc spinning, capturing red, green, and blue. Then the red, green, and blue are combined all three together, and we have white. Here you can see the different colors, and if you combine them in different intensities, you end up with the full gamut of colors in the rainbow, as well as in between. The closer they get to being balanced, the greater white and black it gets. And you saw the color footage. In the slow-mo, you see it again, quite often. That's because of the imbalance that was purposefully done. So now you see the rainbow motion blur. As the object moves, the red and green and blue are capturing different states of the object through its movement. When you combine them, you end up with separate colors. Except where they overlap, you get white the slower it moves. The more natural it looks, the faster, the more rainbowy it looks. And then we can add the glow effect, as well as the residual image. And you get something very similar. Here you get great examples in a few seconds of this type of footage. Here it's similar with video compression added on the top. So you can see, why does their image look so crappy? It was purposefully done to disguise it was on the moon, but it was only added to the hoax. Here are direct examples of the rainbow motion blur. The faster the object moved, the higher the contrast, white over black. It becomes very obvious, gray over gray, not so obvious. Some of these are looping, that's why you see them repeating, because they're just short clips. This is the full presentation. You'll see it throughout the analysis, except in a few cases, in which I have put them in the appendix so that you can see the full presentation of the clips. But in this case, there are a few enough clips that are showing the entire presentation that I think is advantageous, and then we will go through the specific examples at the end of the presentation here of the clips. I will turn some yellow and subdue them. They will not be utilized in this analysis. You can see the ones that I will analyze. Go back and take a closer look. Find which ones you like. Look at the smeary, distorted, crappy look. And, of course, those are my clips. Our factors changed except in comparison. This is the moon speed. This, I don't know, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's very slow. I just wanted to show you so that you can see the rainbow effect. We'll be analyzing thrown and falling objects. It's important for you to understand what you are seeing. I cannot completely explain why. This is quite a complex pipeline they utilized to generate this imagery. It's 24 FPS was the actual speed, and then it was shown here in 30. That's what I have ascertained, acquired from the NASA site, 30 frames per second. So sometimes it just makes it very difficult to analyze, to reverse engineer. But we have enough control, that is, we can analyze the falling objects for gravity. There's a shimmery, otherworldly effect established, quite extraordinary. This is, of course, very slowed down, so that you can see the effect. Here, sometimes you'll see it. It's compressed. Sometimes you see multiples. It's not very straightforward. We may never completely understand how they generated this imagery, but we have enough control to analyze for gravity, so that you can see the severe compression as well as distortion. Because of the white shovel over the darker gray background, the rainbow motion blur is more easily noticeable. And of course, the extreme movement. This is frame by frame. Why the specific changes are occurring, I do not completely understand. I have not completely analyzed for that. I do not see a need for it at this time. Then there's the camera's utilized lenses. There's distortion as a result. You can see this in the modern camera. That's cut in half so that you can see the glass inside. Lenses are curved. They're curved more extremely, less extremely. There's an array of lenses. This creates a complex, really complex situation of light moving through, and then you see the extreme curvature here depending on the lenses utilized. You end up with a certain amount of distortion. Here is a graphic example of distortion. This is a fisheye, an extreme fisheye, and this is the opposite. It is called pinch and push, I believe. And you'll find the footage. This is the kind of distortion that you can see. It helps disorient the viewer as well as it can make things look further away than they really are. Frames per second is a very important aspect of this hoax. You need to understand it, so take some time to understand it. A projector, this is how the film is run through the projector. The arm's grabbing the film, moving it along, and there's a spinning disc letting light through. You have reels of film, and depending on how quickly the film moves through the projector versus how quickly it is captured, you will end up with some effects, like slow motion and sped up. That's the DAC camera on the left, 16mm camera, and projector on the right, 24 frames per second. You move 24 FPS through the projector. As it was captured by the camera, you end up with a normal motion. 1 second, here's a 144 frame strip. And you can capture it all 144 frames per second if you want. That's quite extreme, almost never done. But if you do, 1 second of action captured at 144 frames per second, projected at 144 frames per second, equals 1 second of action. However, if you project that same 144 frames at 24 frames per second, you end up with a 6 seconds of action. Because it's 6 times as long, the footage is 24 frames. That's extreme slow motion. Here's an example. There's 24 frames captured and projected. That's 144 frames at the bottom, captured and projected out of 24 frames. It takes 6 times as long because it's only 24 frames per second, 6 seconds. This is accomplished by the optical printer mentioned in the summary. You have a camera pointed at the projector. It's projecting 1 frame at a time. The camera clicks, and you can skip 3 frames and capture another frame. And you can do it all in any portion, however you like. Effects were accomplished this way too. So here we have 144 frames per second film strip. We can fill those 24 frames with different frames from the 144 frame strip, using our optical printer. You can see the pattern I used, the frames I used. This will give us different frames per second. You can recreate frames per second. You can recreate frames per second depending on the pattern you choose. And this is very significant in how this hoax was accomplished. There are all the specific frames per second that I have extracted from the footage that I believe were utilized. Here you can see the pattern of the frames, and the ones that have some in-between frames which you can use for the rainbow effect mentioned earlier. Quite extraordinary setup, and very efficient and effective. Here we see examples of those frames per second, playing at 24 frames per second. So you get different speeds of action. You could take 44 frames per second and play it at 24 frames per second. You could take 59 and play it at 24. How it was captured, or the speed it was captured or generated at versus the speed I played it at. Those are the factors of frame length. And these are the factors of frame length that were utilized, that I utilized, to reverse their slow motion, and made it look normal, as it was originally performed. You can see the 44 frames per second, it is the main film speed, and the others that were used in specific instances. Here we see them all, those frames per second, modified by the factors I showed. You can barely tell the difference, it's the same action, gone through a different process. And almost identical at the end of my process, my reverse engineering. You can see the subtle changes. You could see subtle time frame changes used out of 144 frame film length, and so you can rely on the process I used to reverse engineer this action. Now the other complication mentioned was the fact that I was captured to 24 frames per second, yet shown to us and presented to the website at 30 frames per second, because that was normal NTSC frames per second. I did add some stuttering. The bottom of the 30 frames per second and at the top is also 30 frames per second. But I added stuttering, which you will find in some of the footage, and there's a phenomenon that I find quite interesting, is that the distortion of the footage, because it was broadcast from the moon, did some time changes where it actually went backwards in time and started up again, yet remained in sync. And that's a phenomenon that I think should be explored more, but of course I won't because it wasn't real. It will just confuse the viewer and make it think like it was coming from the moon. Now we get to the gravity analysis. Here you can see I show you how I came up with my graphic for analyzing the gravity. The blue is Earth gravity and the red is the moon gravity. You can see an obvious difference. The moon objects fall slower while the blue objects fall faster. We won't see those animated in the analysis. I'm just showing you how this graphic was generated. The footage was matched up to the astronauts so that the astronauts were the same size, and based on that the analysis was generated. You should familiarize yourself with the number on the graphics. They represent frames. The object should take a certain specific number of frames to fall every time. There is no exception. Gravity does not change. And because of the frames per second, 24 frames per second here presented at 30 frames per second, it's the same thing. It's 1 second of their time. And you can tell by the sound sync. It's 30 frames per second. You can tell by how many frames it could take an object to fall on the moon, in a certain number of frames and a certain distance. It doesn't change. So here we have astronauts jumping for various reasons. Locomotion, fun, who knows? There obviously was no jumping in the first three that I could locate, and mostly in A17 here. And of course they had the astronauts on wires, so in my analysis their gravity was always accurate to the moon. This was a frames per second combo with wires, and based on the equations you saw earlier, about 46% of the weight staying up on wires, and so it was quite the same as the wire simulation. weightless quality, or excuse me, lowered weight quality. But of course, combined with the frames per second, which was 44, they always fell at the exact right speed. Here we monitor at the top of the head because no matter what part of the astronaut you look at, as long as you can clearly designate where it is, at the beginning and ending of the jump. Here also, taking the beginning of the jump to the apex where it stops going up, or the apex down where it starts going down, to where he lands. If you question my choice of these, then there's not much I can do about that. But I was as accurate as I could be. You can see I matched up the astronaut to the graphic based on where the feet were located. And if they were leaning forward at the top of the pack, it's where the top is. And if you see them leaning over, that is very accurate. The pack doesn't really go much over that, the astronaut's head. And based on where the astronaut is located in the suit, eye level about middle of the visor, and the head was not much over that, I determined what the height was. And so of course, these are all wrong in my factor change clips. But not if you include wire work. And here of course, they're right every time. What it does do is it should provide confidence in my method here. Also, I think one earlier on was yellow. That meant it was off by a frame. I could only find one other occasion where I think my analysis was off by a frame. But because of all of their little tricks with frames per second, dropping frames and so forth, I can see why that might be the case. Sometimes I establish the footage. You can see up in the top left corner a reference of the actual footage, and then how I modified the footage. You can determine based on the differences. Now, getting to the dropped and thrown objects, there's quite a few. This is really one of the significant things that led me to proceed forward with this analysis, is that we found so many opportunities to measure the gravity. You just saw the classic hammer and feather, and that was one of many. Several dozen here. And they littered the moon, literally, in the last few missions. And there were quite a few opportunities because they were walking around on wires, running around on wires, and acting very comfortable on the moon, where it's a pretty dangerous environment. So obviously I didn't analyze all of these. They're not always really analyzable. You can, I'll show you, after the presentation of these clips, you'll see which ones dissolve away as yellow. Those are the ones I did not include, and as you can take a closer look at this for yourself and see if you'll find something different. And here we go. We shall eliminate the ones I cannot analyze. We're left with quite a few that I can, and those are significant. Even the ones being wrong should raise alarms. We have a bunch. This is wrong. It says it takes 19 frames in the footage. Here you go, side by side. And you can see the modified one. Definitely falls slower, as it should on the moon. And here is my factor of 5 to 4 slowed down, here. And it is correct. You can always repeat these. Pause, replay if you want to see it again. I only show them to make the difference clear. It was 22 in the footage, I modified it to make it 30. Here you see them side by side, here are some of the earlier. It's Apollo 14, you can see the incredible distortion in the footage. It's really incredible how they tried to hide. The footage itself is also unbearable to look at in slow motion, the presented speed. But at this even makes it worse. So it's 21 in the raw footage here, 31 in the modified is correct. See the difference? It should be 31 at that height. there's quite a bit of difference of 10 frames, so we're not talking a frame or two here. And in my footage it is 12, which is correct. I say my footage, my modified version of the footage, based on the frames per second factor. 21:30. You can see the difference, how slow it takes, how much longer it takes, and in my footage it is longer and slower. Some of these are considered questionable, but it always plays out. It's correct in mine. It's way off on the moon, the NASA footage, and I modified. And you can see the difference. So I'm just running through these again and again and again. It just keeps going on, and you can look at these more closely. I just wanted to present them to you so that you can do more careful analysis of my analysis, which you should do. I would like to spend some time to confirm what I have discovered here. Here is an astronaut, and then I move the graph. The measurement graph to where the action indicator bars are. When the frames hit, you can see it turn red if you didn't already notice. And it gives you a reference, the same size as my astronaut graphic. I just moved it separately so that the astronaut graph is there to establish an accurate sizing for measurement, and the overlay graphic is moved to more accurately show the distance the object traveled in frames. Every time it's about 2/3 difference there. It's 2/3 as many frames as it should be. And in mine, correct every time. Well, let me correct that statement. Almost every time. And I'll show you why soon. Those are not correct. These are some tricky fellows who created this footage. This is quite extraordinary, looking at it now. I missed that one. Yellow 15 was off. That's minor. It's not really an issue as discussed. It's frame dropping. They had all kinds of tricks going on to disguise what was happening here. When you see the yellow graph there, it just means that I've done some stabilization, and I put it there as a reference. It was usually hand done stabilization, enough that you can measure. Here you can see the lens distortion, fairly obviously because of the stabilizing. And here you can see how the same objects in the background get distorted as they approach the edge of the frame. Now these are, the past one and this one are, really extraordinary things. What's happening here is that it's wrong in my footage. And it was like, why is that? Well, I realized that they did a frame adjustment. Notice the factor change at the bottom. 0.41, it was 0.54, 0.41, back to 0.54. They changed the factor during the throw. The object movement to simulate the moon, the proper speed, and it jumped back, and you can't tell. They may not be doing these for this. There's a whole section on speeds change. You can see how often they use that technique to disguise their methods. Again, you can see the factor change. This is a harder one because the camera is moving so much, but it's clear to me. You can see that I have multiple versions of the graph. One is in the background, You can see I have 2 moon men astronauts because I'm trying to measure how far it went. I do the factor change and it works. 0.41. Why 0.41? Because that's your film and normal speed, and you have to multiply that film speed, the length, by 0.41 to achieve simulated moon gravity. Now these points were in the analysis presentation. Now this is wrong. Watch the 0.4 change. 0.5, there it is. And then change back. Here it is. It's going to happen again. 0.41. Unless you're looking at the bottom, you won't notice these changes. They found because they could do them. Obviously they did. They didn't do it every time. So that's when I found it was wrong. Look at all the movement taking place. Look at the factor change timing. And it's amazing that it works so well. He's running at us in slow motion, and there's a speed change right in the middle. You can see extreme popping and mucking up of the footage. Here's the classic event. Now we get to the sand. Basically, when I did my analysis, I looked through all the footage several times, and anytime I found sand falling, I marked it, separated it out as a clip. So here's what we're seeing every time I found sand falling. Now when I do the analysis, you'll see I limited it to the ones I could, though I could analyze. Because of the mucking of the image, especially sand separates, unless you get a closer indication of when it starts and stops, going up or going down, you really can't analyze it. Sometimes you can, you don't need where it stops. You just need enough frames so that you can say, I've seen it move. And again, as we get further emissions, A17, almost the case, it has more. A16 and A17 are almost always the jewels of the missions for analyzing footage. Here's our graph astronaut for measuring, and here you saw the sand falling. It's wrong, I say 31 frames. I'm showing you clearly where it begins. Where it ends, it should take 40 frames. Now I am confident in my discerning where the sand starts to fall and when the front edge hits the ground. And it is correct in my footage. It is very blurry, very difficult. I would go back and forth and see the changes on the ground, and wherever I did, I discerned where the sand hit, even if it's totally off a frame or two. That's minor compared to the differences we're seeing here. Watch closely. Compare the different rates at which the sand is falling in these images. It is easy to see that this footage that NASA presented to us was in fact slowed down, and then sped back up again to match the gravity on the lunar surface. And when corrected, you can see that the sand is actually falling in Earth's gravity, as shown in these examples. Watch as this astronaut drops the sand from the shovel that he is trying to get into the sample bag. Notice the difference in the astronaut sidestepping in the left frame versus the right frame. You cannot have that happen in lunar gravity. This was clearly filmed on the Earth. Here you can see the difference when I stopped before it hit the ground. I couldn't read clear when it hit the ground, but you can clearly analyze at any point during the fall if you want, so I stopped here. The rate is the same on those frames. I encourage you to do your own analysis of these two frames and the ones that will follow. What you will find will be very interesting indeed. In these frames, watch the difference at the speed of which the sand falls. You'll notice that the sand in the left frame hits the surface first before the sand in the right. Again, please notice the clip. It's right next to the bottom. You can go to the NASA site referenced earlier in this presentation and look at the evidence for yourself and determine for yourself what's going on in the footage. Try to keep a mental note of how many times you are seeing things fall in this clip. Note the different rates at which the sand falls on the left compared to the right, and then back to the middle. And then back to the left and back to the right, and then back to the middle. The sand behaves as if it was in Earth gravity, slowed down and then sped up again, and then slowed down. Do you realize how many times we're seeing things fall here and the wrong speed in the NASA footage? This is not a fluke. This is clear evidence this imagery is faked. This is an interesting dilemma. I had to determine where the top of the instrument was, and then to help aid myself with the analysis, I used one of my gravity balls. And you can see it matches up. It doesn't match up, according to my analysis, in the expected times. And here are a few examples of an astronaut falling down, kicking up sand. And here, scooping and tossing sand with a shovel. Here I use the top of the sand. Here it hits the top and falls. You can see it disappear, and it's a great time to determine when it starts and stops falling. Let's compare a couple of these clips. He did a lot of shoveling, so I have a lot of opportunities to measure. It's wrong every time. To demonstrate this, I will speed the footage up, slow it down, and then speed it up again to match what was actually happening. And as you can see, NASA got it wrong again. Let's watch that example one more time. Keep an eye on the top counter as the sand hits the ground. You'll notice that the time frames are different. This would not be possible had this really been on the lunar surface. This time, we see the astronaut step backwards as he finishes shoveling. You can clearly see that one pile of sand is hitting the lunar surface, or so-called lunar surface first, before the other. Let us take a further look at how gravity affects objects that are thrown. And of course, they did the same thing that they did with falling objects. Whenever they could, they did a speed change event. Factor change to frames per second change to hide that this was faked footage. There's only a few of those. I find those very interesting, where the astronaut's jumping. At the same time, sand is falling, and you can clearly see that the sand falls faster. This is the moon speed that NASA, aka NASA Imagery, has been presented to us. Look at the way the sand is and how it hits the ground before the astronaut does. They should be falling at the exact same speed. That's what the hammer and the feather was all about. It doesn't matter what object you drop from the same height, they land at the same time because there's no atmosphere to slow them down, slowing down the more air-resistant objects. So here, the sand is up with his feet, and it totally clears out below him, and then he lands. In all of these examples, the sand will always land first before the astronaut touches the ground. And here are a few more clips slowed down. This is the famous jump salute. And they're the more obvious ones to me. Sand is up there with his feet. Sand is up there with his foot, and then it's clear it's falling as fast as in Earth gravity. He's falling slower because he's hanging from a wire. The sand falls faster while the astronaut is clearly, again, hanging from a wire. It really makes me wonder how NASA was able to get away with this. Here, we will go through some speed change events. These were when the film factor or frames per second at their end was changed midstream. When we're looking at the footage, that is, they did it quite often when we weren't looking at the astronauts. And here we have examples. While we're watching the astronauts move around, they changed the frames per second for various reasons. And quite often, early on, they did it whenever an astronaut came close to the camera. And you'll see, you saw earlier when I disclosed the frames per second that they used. They didn't slow them down as much when they were close to the camera or doing detailed action because they were just, well, they looked too ridiculous. So they had to look to make it normal, as if they were behaving more normal with their hands. For instance, when they got away further from the camera, they got away with more. But as they ran to the camera, for some reason, they thought they should be moving faster when they got close to the camera. So they did a lot of that, and sometimes they did it oddly. I'm not sure why they made the decisions that they made, but they did. They thought it was necessary to fool us, and they were right. Although I think one of the reasons that they succeeded so far for the last 50 years is that no one has fully analyzed the footage as I have. For the most part, it's been accessed, but thanks to the internet, I had access. I found it, and I decided to look at all of it, and what I found was amazing. And we are going through all of these events. If you watch the factor at the bottom of the footage, you can see it change midstream. Sometimes they are significant and sometimes they're not. I'm showing you all the ones that I found. However, during the presentation reveal, I will only show the most significant ones. Here you can see A15 in the winner of this one. You can see I eliminate most of them because you lack motion blur, so here's their version. Look how fast he's going. So down here he slows down. And my assumption is, as they were watching the footage, when they generated it, they said, he just looks too slow in the camera, we gotta speed him up. Here it is at my 0.45 factor, and I was analyzing the footage. I said, whoop, why does he look like a clown? Here's the same trick again. More than a few times, they thought it was necessary. There, it's hardly noticeable. Of course, you speed up the footage and, whoa! He starts out slow, and then he just takes off. There's that stuttery look again, somehow going back in time, and forward again. I don't think that happened in any legitimate footage, ever in the history of footage, except for on the moon. And so, I don't notice any changes they did. It's a subtle change in slow motion, but when I was looking at it here, he looked fast. Then I did the adjustment, it looked better. I'm sure I missed many times exactly what the changes are they made. I just did the most obvious ones that looked and stuck out to me. That was a change in the middle. Did you see how the astronaut just sped up in the middle like that? Here, let's watch that again. Watch as the astronaut comes close to the camera, he's in slow motion. And then, keep watching, there, all of a sudden, he just sped up. There he is again. Looks going fast. He seems to go a decent speed, and then, next. So here we are, the standard, 0.615 for rover activity. And they change it so he can run away. If you watch closely, you can see little spasms that the astronauts make. That was a spasm if you didn't notice. Here he is in my constant factor. That's the spasm. And then, now you don't even notice it here. It was proper at 6.615 earlier, and he wasn't proper. I had to find the time change as they became standard practice. When they're near the rover, I find the factor that works, and as they get further away with different factors and so forth, so I just took the opportunities to change, so that I follow the most likely. I do not nail it precisely every time, but I did it enough to show that it occurred. The astronaut walks slowly and then speeds up, if you notice. Look how boring this footage is. It's amazing at their moon speed. No wonder no one wants to look at this. You want to go to sleep. Look at the NASA moon footage. Why? Because it's in slow motion. We can't bear to watch it all the time. It's absurd. So, for posterity's sake, let's speed things up a little, shall we? And now, back to NASA's speed. So again, my standard way of showing this to you is my determined way that it was the factor that needs to be utilized. There's a speed change, and then I show you the NASA footage. And then I show you the constant factor that I first created and which was revealed. that it wasn't normal, and I had to do speed change adjustments. So once again, let's have a look at this boring rover footage from this angle and watch the astronaut how he speeds up and slows down at times. I'm sorry that I had to show you this footage. I had to go through this process so that it's clear what is going on. Here's the constant factor. Now let's watch this astronaut speed it up. This one, here's an example. There's a speed change between 0.57 and 0.54, not dramatic. But it's a great example of how the astronaut's in full motion. He hits the ground, starts his different stride, some kind of change, and allows them to hide the factor change. So the astronauts were hanging from wires. We'll discuss that here, its backpacks, so forth. Here's a suit laid out. I think pre-launch, possibly post-launch. You can see a lot of little items. You can research all of this on the internet. You can see the fancy understructure. It's going to have to be pressurized, and well, it's got movement. And here's a diagram explaining what all of the parts of the suit are, and whether or not they were used on the set. They could have been modified, certainly the pack, which we'll go over here. It was probably modified, it may not have been made of all of that equipment. It certainly didn't have to do with all this stuff. More than likely they pressurized the suits a little bit, as well as the water that went around. When astronauts were testing the suits on the Earth, they still had to have coolant in there, but it didn't need to. So much oxygen feeding because they were in it, oxygen-filled set. And I imagine that they took as much weight off of these astronauts as they could so that they felt a little more comfortable. Here we have a reporter showing how the suit came off. And we're just speeding it up a little so that you get a sense of everything that was involved. Now the inner structure is connected to the outer garment there. So here we can see that structure, and here's the wire setup you saw in the summary. For some reason, the pack is sideways. And this is the same structure that was used for the LM, I believe, testing that we saw earlier on the fake set, the model set and so forth. And here we are looking down at the astronaut, and you can see the gentleman top of their head walking along with him. And this is the extraordinary lengths that you have to go to simulate lunar gravity. That's the difference. It's such a significant difference. It's so much less than the Earth. They have to be practically sideways to simulate it. Here you can see the ground is tilted slightly. And here he is jumping on his sideways set. And this is all simulated. You can see how he's strapped in, and it's very effective. See the correct way of doing it, but certainly not completely accurate. However, look at the extraordinary abilities this light gravity gives them. Now, he doesn't have the full suit on here. He does not have the backpack. We'll see a little bit of that later. It's still amazing. Look at how he can land on his hands, and without effort. We don't see any of this on the moon, do we? In the NASA footage. Almost nothing like this. Look, he lands on his hands again. Extraordinary. Here we are in the pressure suit. We are going to see tests where the suit is actually pressurized. You can see the comparison between the two. And he's getting rigged into place. And you'll see a comparison between Earth gravity conditions, which means no wires, and he's standing straight up, and the moon conditions where we're looking down on him sideways, and look at the left. Looks like the guy's walking. In my factor change on the right, he's floaty. Why is he floaty? Because 83% of his weight is taken up by wires. He can't run. Why? There's no friction. He's so light now that he can't get any friction with his feet. However, on the left on Earth, it's easier. These are both pressure suits, not fully pressurized, that is my understanding, close enough to the limitations that the suit would provide. And as you can see, an effortless flip. And here he goes again, and he lands on his hands without a problem. I saw no kind of agility like this in our moon footage. Seen every time they fall, look at how floaty the legs are. They practically don't want to go down. This is some silly gravity test. Climbing into the LEM, look at all the cables that they have on him. I kind of think sometimes this was produced to show, oh, look what it takes to hang the wires. It takes nothing like that. This is the Vomit Comet. It's a plane that does arcs in the sky to simulate gravity or weightlessness. Here is moon gravity being demonstrated. He does a face plant to test the helmet. And here he looks like a fish out of water. They had problems with the backpacks, and so they had to redesign them because he couldn't get up, and here he is trying to get up. Look how awkwardly it looks. It totally contradicts what Aldrin just said, which was his excuse for the slow motion. Pretty blatant if you ask me. And look how floaty he is. He can barely stay on the ground. He's got the backpack and a fully pressurized suit, and he's struggling to keep his feet on the ground. This is amazing. There's nothing like it in that footage. And where was the wire located? It was just one wire, I'm quite sure, right in the middle both ways from the front and the side. And it was made up of monofilament, perhaps braided, perhaps a metal monofilament, whatever didn't show up on the camera. And you heard Douglas Trumbull talk about that. It's not uncommon. And look at the size of that. It's tiny, 5 millimeters from left to right. And so how did it not show up on the camera? That's not a big deal, and here we go with the analysis of the moon gravity versus Earth gravity. I come up with the equations, and based on the frame rate, you can use a specific counterweight that allows the astronaut to fall at the same rate as they would on the moon when viewed through the 24-frame projection setup. If you are interested in this, you should look at it closely. I put all of it here in front of you, and if you're not interested, I understand. I know it's complicated. It was tough for me to come up with it, so I know it's very complicated. Even now, to go back, it's not intuitive. You have to look at every little bit of it and see that there's a problem. Otherwise, getting into this is not easy. So I don't blame you if you're not interested. You can go past this into the next section, but it does show you that at any frame rate you choose, you can come up with a counterweight that holds the astronaut up to allow them to fall properly, so that combined with their counterweight and the frame rate, it shows you they will fall at moon speed when viewed on film. And you'll see 59 frames per second and 0%. That means you film at the rate and show it at 24 frames per second, and it will look like it is falling on the real moon. Here's our master rate at 44 frames per second. you can see 44.6%. I was mentioning 46% earlier, 44.6 counterweight, and here it is summarized. What is necessary for each frame per second, 48 frames per second was not used. I just used it as a benchmark here. Here we have some examples of what I consider evidence of the wires. Some odd behavior, physics, odd physics behavior, astronaut behavior that for most part can be explained by having the wire pulled at them from above. We'll go through all of the footage, you can see all of the strange behavior, and we'll look at the clips that I think are clear examples of astronauts hanging from wires with approximately 44.6% counterweight. Here you can see these quick movements that they did. It's quick, sped up. Don't send them in the air. They do a lot of that. If you watch the Vomit Comet footage, you'll see it. Anytime they start moving, you'll have to be ready to push up. Quick pushing up with his legs. He's going to launch. Same with the wire work. So, all of these clips are the ones we are going to look at. You'll see a lot of spinning because they've got that central wire pulling up. They're kind of using it. This is natural. You've got these forces working on you. You kind of use them after a while. That was odd, right? He's kind of swung back down again. The legs are not floaty here. Here he's kind of spinning a little bit. And here his legs go right to the ground. They don't float. There's no problem keeping his feet touching the ground. Whereas in all the simulation stuff, the feet tend to stay up because they're so light. On Earth they're going to fall with gravity. And the wire is pulling, probably from his mid-back a little higher. You can see the backpack bending on this one at the top. You should look at that one again. There's another clear example later. You'll see. It's an odd balancing act being pulled up from the top. I find these interesting. You can see them swaying almost like they're in sync, because you know they look like they're leaning a little bit because they're resting on a wire. I have no doubt there's that spasm because they're resting on wires. It feels like the wires not holding them up, so it made them spasm a little bit, and they don't even realize that they're resting on the wires. This is an interesting one. Watch the astronauts sway in sync is because they're connected to the same rig at the top, meaning the same metal rigging that's holding the wires. Here I stabilize it so it's a little more obvious. Lens distortion throws it off a little bit, but you can see them swaying together because they're resting on the wires. If the wires pull up, they move a little bit. Here you can see the backpack bending from the wire bending back a little bit. And sometimes they look like puppets, right? And in all of this pushing up and the sudden movements that they do, they never once fly up in the air. Remember how easy it was for the astronauts to jump and land back on their hands when they were attached to their rigging. It didn't seem very hard for them as they almost went flying back into the air. So why don't we see that happening here? Watch as these astronauts twist in a circle. I call this the rotisserie dance. You can clearly see that a wire is being pulled a little too soon. And here again, we see the rotisserie dance. This one seems funny and obviously in slow motion. Here's the slow motion aspect. You can see hopping and jogging. Extraordinary amount of it too. They did a lot of movement on the moon in the footage. The extent to which these missions are supposed to have taken place, it's really, well, crazy. And the amount of running and hopping that they did in this very dangerous environment is irresponsible, to say the least. What I have done is to categorize them here. You can see them coming at the camera, away from the camera, hopping to left and right, and in some scenes moving away from the camera. Even at full resolution of this, you can decide which ones interest you. Look at them all. There are so many. Here are some more scenes of the astronauts moving away from the camera. Watch the top of the screen as I retime both for Earth speed and for moon speed. And here I have analyzed them. You can see the factor change in red versus the NASA version. NASA version obviously slow motion. Anyone in denial of this point is fooling themselves and should stop. And you saw earlier in the summary, they look normal, and this looks slow motion. And then we have them hopping on wires toward the camera, and then hopping on wires toward the camera in slow motion. You can see the astronaut in the back trying to regain his balance. Here he is trying to regain his balance in slow motion. That's just ancillary to the guy running at the camera. But you'll see more of that in the stumble section. Here he is walking. I actually find walking more revealing than the hopping and jogging because it looks like the guy's walking, even with the wires on their back, holding them up. And when you compare it to the wire footage in the wire section, you can see that it's much closer in action to the guy not on wires. And then it is to the guy on full moon simulation wires, which is the one that had him sideways at the beginning. Now these are all short clips. When we do the reveal, you'll see long clips, and it's almost laughable. So here they all are together. You can see what I consider normal speed. It makes an incredible difference the way the astronauts walk and behave. I know it's difficult, but take your time and watch each individual frame as the astronaut moves. Even in this crappy footage, you can see the guy walking normally, but he's kind of stumbling. He's hanging on his wire, and he's walking. This is a great example of the oily suit, which you can see in the oily suit section. You'll see more of an explanation of what's going on there. I just love this one. Look, he's just walking on the moon.
say I am full of wit, while others say just half. So take me on your big spaceship, and we'll have a good old laugh. We'll go walking on the moon.
And of course, this is the factor change in red at the bottom. You can see the factor change. What you saw, 0.54, this is a 0.57 because he's doing more detailed action. I think that this is incredible. I mean, how many of you have walked over to rocks on a hill, on a hike, and you maintain your balance while doing that, and there, he just had a little stutter. That's amazing. It looks like a normal guy's walking in the desert. A little odd because 46% of their weight is being lifted up by wires. And I'm sure the packs on their backs were not as heavy as they were supposed to be in the moon packs, because they're not really on the moon. It doesn't have to do everything it was supposed to do. Here you can see the camera is almost constantly moving. Very seldom it is still. They have all kinds of things going on to keep it busy and keep you from figuring out what's going on, keeping it noisy and cloudy. Isn't this great? Look, he's just walking. This one too, he's walking over the rocks. See those subtle moments of him catching his balance, adjusting his step? Do you see how he's trying to keep his balance while the wires do all the work? I find the stumbling also very revealing, catching your balance, trying not to land on your head. Instinctively, we all move quickly to prevent catastrophic damage to ourselves. There's not much you can do about it. Reaction and reaction speed. Here at the factor change versions, you can see them performing these natural jerks and very quick adjustments, not to fall on their heads, whereas at moon speed, you'll see it's obviously slow motion. Here are a few examples of this. I have sped these clips up to prove that this was filmed in slow motion. It's quite obvious, isn't it? There's obviously oil in the sand to keep it from, well, dusting, fanning out. Just look at the way the sand behaves after the astronaut kicks it in the air. This so-called regolith contains water or an oily substance. It's quite a set. We won't look at all of them, but we will look at a lot of them. Just remember that the yellow frames are the ones that are dropouts. There's the moon speed. You can clearly see that the astronaut on the left is dangling from a wire. Some of the actions aren't noticeable as odd, and the moon speed NASA presented version was because you don't accept the action as what it really is. But this is a joke. I mean, come on. Some of these are just clearly recorded in slow motion. How anyone could accept this as anything else is not really reasonable. I will show you a few more examples of this. Look at that. And again, that. And now this. You can clearly see that the wire on this astronaut is being pulled taut. That is why he is stumbling and jerking. And now the rotisserie dance. The conclusion is that this astronaut is being pulled taut on a wire at the wrong time. And here we see evidence of that again. Watch as the astronaut trips over his own feet and then the wire is pulled taut. Incredible, isn't it? Watch how the astronaut behaves after he trips and drops the package. This is just slow motion. Whoa! Whoa! And again we see the wire aiding the astronaut. And there is no reason for them to even move slower. If you look at the wire analysis footage, later on you'll see them behaving differently compared to the Vomit Comet simulated moon gravity. So the spasms I just found this as I was looking. I asked, what are they doing? What are these weird jerks? And what do you know? It's someone being pulled off balance with a wire, suddenly and unexpectedly, snapping to regain it. What is happening here? Well, it's not because of the backpack. We've all worn backpacks, or at least most of us have. We're ready for it. If someone pulls up on us, or someone snags us that we didn't expect, throws us momentarily off balance, even if we weren't going to fall, we respond as if we were, and adjust ourselves. These astronauts are being pulled up by a wire. The wire is actually pulling up on them, and unexpectedly there's some tension. Or something happens, or it pulls in a way that they don't expect, and they react to it and adjust to it. they regain their balance. And it is also possible that for whatever reason, it feels like it's not pulling up much, and not as supportive. They feel like they're going to fall forward as they snap back, because more than likely, they're resting on the wire quite often. They're relying on it, they're resting on it, they've actually letting it lift them up, and so they don't feel as heavy when they hop and jog. So now that we've looked at the footage extensively, we're going to move forward and examine how they did it. And one of the first things we should look at is the film gauges and how it was utilized to make this happen. Film gauges refer to the size of the film, 16mm, 35mm, 70mm, as well as others. Double 70 or IMAX, it depends if the film is sideways or vertical when it was used to capture. How do these film formats compare to each other? Basically, you use a large film like IMAX, then you can use a smaller to recapture it by using the optical printer and have plenty of resolution for the smaller format. I believe the Apollo footage, TV camera footage, was originally captured in 16mm and then optically printed of sorts with a TV camera. It was transferred to TV, video in other words, and here you can see the difference in resolution. Clear, plenty of resolution in the 16mm, and on set, this probably was rigged so that it was underground or transferred via wire. I know that the TV camera had fiber optics in it. It's very similar to an endoscope. The lens is on one end of the fiber optic and the light moves through the fiber optic to whatever is receiving the light on the other end. For instance, film. And that allows it to travel distances, and that explains why we have this lens distortion on the side. In fact, more than just the lenses themselves. This was all captured on a set. Huge set, multiple sets. There was probably a set for every location where they went to. Possibly reused, rebuilt, but they were highly accurate, built on satellite imagery, captured for the Apollo program. Highly detailed, highly accurate imagery. How big were the sets? Well, they weren't as big as the entire location visible in the scenery, in the images and the footage. That would be absurd. Might as well just go to the moon, if you could. So, how big were they? Well, if you reduce things, was it everything you saw? Was it just the close mountains? That's still too big. Well, firstly, it had to be enclosed. Was it this small? No. I'm guessing around this big, 300-meter diameter or somewhere in that range. The background was a backdrop of sorts, such are used in the movies, but a very sophisticated one. This was an enclosed environment with a backdrop. The backdrop was projected with highly accurate model imagery created that matched the set. Everything highly accurate to what the moon looked like, as accurate as possible, and then the higher detail was built up based on what they saw. There were advanced satellites and landers sent to the moon, unmanned. They took pictures. They used that as reference. The projection method was photographs of the model with soft boundaries and mosaicked together, just like the panoramic images that you'll learn about. Because of the nature of the moon, the grayscale, the boundaries are fairly easy to do. Here you can see mountains in Cinerama, is very similar to Cinerama technology in the 1960s by Douglas Trumbull. And here you can barely see the boundaries. In the sky you can't see them at all. You can only see them because you know they are there, and when you use a little more of your imagination, you can improve them. At the bottom you can't see them here, at the top you can. Here you can see the size of this projection compared to the audience. This is a graph of the setup. There are 3 projectors. This is similar, but not necessarily, how it was accomplished on the moon set. But they had a camera on a model, turning around taking pictures around the location. And what a projection allowed them to do was to change the image in the backdrop as they needed. And these are huge projections, but that's not a difficult thing. As you can see, these are movie projections. The backdrops on the moon sets were still images. And here is a calibration for the 3 projectors. They were projected and used that to calibrate the placement of the images on the screen, and no doubt they did that for the backdrop. This is an example of the moon model, and you can see the lighting. You have multiple lights, as the light like the sun, and there is a boundary, but it's barely noticeable on this very simplistic model, and this is not an uncommon thing. You can see this in Star Wars, and it had a backdrop for their Hoth scene, and that's because it was all white snow. It's not that hard to make that look real enough, especially if it's on the moon. No one's ever seen it before, and it's just grayscale images. This is a real Apollo set, built outside. There's a giant rig that holds up the lunar module. So they practice landing the thing. It's a cheat, because it's hanging on wires, and so it's not going to flip over. There's doubts the thing would actually work. Here you see it's a cheesy looking set because it doesn't have all the detail that was thrown in. That looks like a model, but it was sped up. I sped it up so that we don't have to sit here watching the whole thing. You can find it online, but it is an example of a large set with craters built. They did a much more sophisticated, reasonable implementation for the hoax, obviously, and sometimes I think that these kinds of footage too, they throw you off. Well, this is the best that we can do. It's the best you can do? Really? So here we have examples of maps of these locations of the landings. It's generated from satellite imagery and highly analyzed. Here you can see the scale is 500 meters. And you can see this kind of stripping. That's from the satellite passes, multi-passes, and we're probably not seeing the full resolution they had access to. Here is about the scale of the set that I'm saying. The size, you can see that undulations there. You have plenty. You can fake rocks and small craters if that's what you need to do, but who's going to know? Even today, they don't have satellite imagery that gets any more detail than that, unbelievably. At least we're not shown it. And here you can see the analyzation of the imagery, gridded. You can use that. Grids are great for reproduction and smaller grids. Here is an extraordinary thing in Cinder Lake, Arizona. They used explosives to create craters based on the ejecta and so forth. This is an accurate reproduction, life-size, of the moon's surface to a large degree. There's the actual satellite imagery on the right. This is the stripping that came from the satellite processes that were joined together and mosaicked. And on the left is the reproduction. And that's a huge reproduction, but not as big as the set I believe they created for doing the fake footage. But this is an extraordinary thing. It shows you the accuracy of the moon mapping and their ability to reproduce it. Here is a computer model based on the mapping. This is what Bell Labs created. They used it to plan out where they would go with the rover or the slopes, too steep and so forth. Why not use it to plan out vantage points for cameras and so forth? What you want to see and what you don't want to see, where it's going to be problematic, and to plan out the sets. Everything was in place. the full simulation program, full mapping program to create these highly accurate sets, and much better than anything that was actually used in the Apollo training program. And this is some supporting documentation for those Bell computer images. These are traverse maps that shows where they went. You can see the LM location. This is Apollo 11. They didn't go very far from the LEM. They show points that they did go to. Those funny looking circles are craters. And you can see Apollo 14 here. They actually went farther out, and locations where things happen. I think it's around 500 meters and 1,000 meters here, and it's not as far as you may think. However, on 15, 16, and 17, they actually went kilometers, 2 kilometers down as a reference. They drove pretty far, supposedly, and there's various locations. You can see EVA 1, EVA 2, that means which day they went out, because they went out on one EVA each day. Where certain stop points are, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, where they had stopped and filmed with the rover, they had a set. So someone can do their due diligence and discover how many sets they probably created. This is my simulation, just mock up again. Here we are at a landing location. This is a set reproduction, so to speak. In the foreground, actual sand, and in the background, it's a backdrop. And it's very similar to watching the footage you've already seen. And if you look more closely, you'll see later, they had multiple lights, but they're flagged off, meaning blocking their light shining on the camera, and they overlap softly. Because of the undulation surface, you'd never notice that there's multiple lights, and here I took away the backdrop so you can see, and this is the set without the backdrop. Very, very revealing. This is where they were. I bring in the backdrop with my colorful grid so that you get a sense of the wall. And because of the nature of the moon's surface, you lose distance, perception, and so forth. So they got away with it, a lot of that. It helped them, in other words, because you can't tell how far away they are. No one really knows the makeup of the moon anyways, and none of the footage was used for reference. You can't use it because there's no reference as to exactly where you are, so any discrepancy can be sold off as, we don't know where the camera was. There was no GPS, they don't know exactly where it was. So there we are, on the moon's surface. The model is used to create the imagery in the background, and identical reproduction to that scale for the set, sand, and so forth. There's a hole in the wall if you need to put the light for back, so no divergent shadow. And here I will show you what happens when we take away the set and we're left with just the model, and of course the astronaut disappears too. It's different. It's not going to match up perfectly. You even find that later when we look at the landing footage, but it's close enough, certainly for this, so photographically they almost definitely modified the photographs they took of the model to match with the set, and or modified the set to match with the photographs. So the edge boundary was seamless, color-wise, luminosity-wise, and so forth. They may have even adjusted it with the lights, because no one's going to know that it's slightly off from what it would actually be. And here we zoomed in on the set again, so that you can get a sense of how this was built. And if you were on set, and they moved the location of the camera, they just changed the imagery that was projected on the wall. With their model, they could shoot from any location they wanted and create a circular set of imagery. This is where you can see the dust event. The dust was sticky. Dirt, the sand was sticky because it was jagged, instead of smooth like the earth sand, which is absurd to me. Sand is sand, jagged or not. It's not going to stick to a suit. The reason it is sticky is because they had a mixture amount of oil or water in it. It doesn't take much. I did my own test. Go buy a bag of sand, you need a little bit of cooking oil. Just mix in a few drops with a handful or even a bowl full of sand and see that it starts to become malleable, almost like clay. And you can find the proper mixture so that it doesn't dust, meaning you don't see particles fly up in the air when you kick it. But it looks like they used a lot here because you can see it sticking to the machinery as well. In fact, the dust was so sticky it stuck to metal. They call it moon dust. It's moon sand. And these are some of the clearer examples, probably because of the overblown suit. And the dust is not. The sand is not reflecting, it's dark sand. But they said they had problems with dust, and the sticky dust. And here you can see other examples later on when I show miscellaneous set stuff. You can see how the sand behaves. Oily sand, oily watery sand, oily sticky sand. I mean, just look at that piece of equipment. It's absurd how much sand is stuck to it. Here, it looks like he's been playing in oil. Perhaps the leaky seal from the rover's hub is spraying oil on him. Who knows? Here we have panoramic images generated by NASA from astronauts. They did what I call a panorama dance, where they did this odd little dance in a circle as they bent their knees and tilted the camera upwards, because it was the only way that they could change the vertical aiming of the camera, and they have quite a few panoramic images here. Here are some multiple ones from some sets and single ones from other sets, and so this is another tool for enterprising young people to more fully recreate the sets that were used. I'm separating them here. The top ones I won't be looking at, the bottom ones I will be looking at. We only have to look at some to get a sense of how they support the locations actually being set, and its limitation of photography and distance differentiation, distance limitations of photography. These are the photographs that we'll be looking at. You can see that I'm doing a fake rotation at the top, basically just scanning the panoramic image, which is essentially almost like spinning a camera in a circle. These are straight from NASA. I've done no modification other than the graph you see I'm putting at the top and so forth. It's kind of obvious what I've done, and you can see the photographic images changes as the astronaut made his turn. But here I'm showing that it supports it being on a set. There's nothing about these that say they could not be on a set. There's nothing about them that says they definitely were on a set. And that's the advantage of the photographic limitations. And the nature of the moon landscape is just gray. You know, it was light, shadow, undulating surface, and you can't tell. There's no trees to tell you which directions the shadows are going. If the lighting is changing, there's no atmosphere to show you the distance. It's a very, very simple set, which makes it very, very easy to simulate. They are showing hills here, but there's no problem creating hills on a set. You can use wood as an understructure or dirt. These are simple things to do. It's not a big deal. And these are enclosed sets. They have to be enclosed to control the environment so no wind gusts and so forth occur. But that can be a tent. It's not a big deal to create a large structure like that. And the only thing above them has to be a crane, a simplistic crane holding up the astronaut's wire. So these are far locations. Looks like we're looking so far out there, and it's just a simple set. A blend to the backdrop that is not as simple. On this one, we are actually behind the LEM. And as you can see, they always get out on the shadow side, and here you can see the sunny side. They did most of the action on the dark side, the shadow side. Here, we're in a little dip, and that's an easy thing to do. We're going near the edge of the set here, and the main part of the set is on the other side of the LEM. This is the same footage, I believe, where you see the rover driving around and you see a reverse angle of this scene. This is the reverse angle, there's the LEM, we were just on the other side. You can see it's kind of a little hole there. This is where the rover was driving around. And there's the rover. This is the lens flare. It happens once you get light from a light source, almost directly entering the lens. And lots of trash. It seems like they like to trash the moon for some reason. And look behind the LEM, there's nothing. And even in the stereo photography a little later, you'll see all of this is supported by the depth perception. It was flat after a certain distance, real or fake. It looks like we're looking past a hill, and its distance back there is easily reproducible on a set with the projected backdrop with the technology they utilized. There's our dividing line. I'm not saying that these are exactly where the sets ended. I'm saying that they could be where the sets ended, and it would work. It would take quite an extensive analysis of all the footage captured at one location to find out more precisely where the set ended and backdrops began when it was implemented. There's nothing more that I would love to see as if some enterprising set people or young person, i.e. Blue Earth thing, would go through the trouble to properly analyze one set. It would be very neat to see. Here we are in a crater. Building a crater is not that big of a deal. You can make it out of a bunch of dirt piled up, wood, or modeling material. You could even put some kind of hard surface material on top and then cover it with sand. I imagine they printed it with sand in the sense that they had some kind of sprayer at the top spraying colored sand in patterns based on how they sort of had the world created. I refer to this process as shotcreting. They did the same thing on the model. You just plan out how you're going to recreate it, projecting, spraying the sand, paint, and what you have. And here is all the sand, and they did it in layers. Darker sand underneath if you needed it, lighter sand on top. They went through the trouble of figuring out how many layers and patterns, putting certain colors sand down and so forth, and then the rocks, and even more sand on top of the rocks. I'd love to see how they especially designed and manufactured this process, but it's not. Certainly not even close to being beyond human capability. So here it looks like there's hills in the background. It's hard to see before, but now I have to remove the hills and pan over the right and you can see the rover over there. The LEM was over there too. It was difficult to see because of the lens flare. So when it comes to the nature of this panorama, it looks like you're looking at a huge landscape. You're not. You're looking at a circle. If you wrap one end over to the other, you make a cylinder. And that's more accurately what you're looking at. This is why I did the crop version and the panning. I mean, we're actually not panning per se. We're reproducing what the astronaut did, which he stood at one place and turned around, went in a circle, spun. Now these are very interesting landscapes, very cool looking, but they're reproduced moon topography. And the more specific details of every rock and so forth, perhaps they had highly detailed imagery. That would be a smart thing, but they had limitations. That was all made up. And we haven't gotten any kind of actual highly detailed reproduction of the actual location from telescopes or satellites since this time. Again, another faraway landscape, but it's just a set with a backdrop, nothing more. Here is a little crater. We'll see the left image on the right side, and the right image on the left side. And now we get to the stereophotography. There are 3 ways of doing stereophotography. I have chosen the red-blue, but there are several ways of achieving this. For this example, you will need glasses with red and blue lenses to achieve divergence. Or try putting cardboard between the 2 images, so only the left eye sees the left image, and the right eye sees the right image. There is convergence where you can cross your eyes until the features match up, and using your brain, merge the 2 together. And the top left, I'll show you which ones you're currently doing. I'm showing you all 3. It's an opportunity. I suggest you pause as you want to see one, and look carefully at these with the yellow arrow. It shows you where the split line is, and you can definitely see, certainly some. These are panoramic images overlap. They're not ideal. I didn't modify them in any way except maybe to rotate and scale a little bit so they were more closely matched, but it's good enough that you can see that there's a flat plane, and after a certain distance, and stereo. My understanding is stereo, after 30 feet, the human eyes, as 2 inches apart, cannot discern any kind of divergence, meaning details look like they're no longer stereo. If you move your head, of course that changes, but you're changing what we just established. If you're standing still and looking at a feature, and after 30 feet you're not going to see in stereo, no divergence, and that serves them well, because that ain't very far. The way the astronauts turned, it's possible there's more than 2 inches between the image, as far as where the camera was when it took the images. Perhaps it could go further, but it's not going to go 100 meters, not before it flattens out. And none of this imagery shows it's going that far. You can see they don't go very far before it goes flat. So, the stereo images are certainly not proof it was on the moon, and they supported it was a set. Not proof it was on the set, but they supported it. Some of them are extraordinary, and we'll get to those near the end. You'll see that. It looks like you're going to look at a flat surface, going into the distance, but in stereo, well, there's a wall, and it's the limitations of stereography and, well, a wall. And the split is not necessarily where you think it would be. You can look and see, and look at the stereo and see where the split is. I added the names of the source photos at the bottom so that you can look on the NASA website at your own convenience. You can also use the cross-eyed method to bring these photos into a 3D view. Here's the rover. Just look at how close it is to us. It doesn't go very far in front of the camera. Using the cross-eyed method, you can see that it does not go far in front of the camera. It looks like you're looking into the valley, but you're looking at a short distance of a set, but a beautiful backdrop nonetheless. Here we are looking down a hill, but we don't go very far before we lose our stereo. These are really extraordinary. Look how close it is to us before it's flat. Here's another one, right up close. The other thing amazing that happens is your brain seeing indicators of dimensionality will create it for you, but it's not really there. If you look carefully, you'll see. This photographing was not designed for stereo. It was designed for panorama. So they almost did very little stereo photography. They did detail images on the ground. So this is using information photography in an unintended way, and we are doing our best to extract information from it. This is a slight overlap, not nearly the overlap, but like the others. You can still see the split lines very close. This one could have been a model, and it's a zoom in of a background. There's no stereo here that I can tell. If there is, there shouldn't be. Zooming doesn't change stereo. This is from the top of the LEM. There's hardly any stereo to note, other than the difference between the LEM and the ground. This is an example taken from two different locations, so you can kind of extract some stereo. It looks like it's dimensional in the background, and that shows it's two different angles in the background. And that's quite possible, but that was done by changing the image that was projected on the background, shot from a model. The model was three-dimensional. You change the image based on where the astronauts are on the set, and you get an accurate image of that. So here we get to some fancy visual effects that has to do with models and technology and rigging and virtual reality, simulators and so forth. And I think that some visual effects breakthroughs were created here and credited elsewhere. The lunar rover appeared to move quite a distance across the moon's surface. Kilometers, several, 27 kilometers I believe it was. There's a graph later that shows you more, and simulator technology is used. It's been around for ages. Here are very simplistic versions. Someone moves the prop while they're in it, and there's a fancy version, a jet simulator. And here's a mock-up I did of how the lunar simulator was created. This is a lunar rover simulator. There's some footage there. I think it was created on this simulator. Basically, a model was filmed and the astronauts are put in the rig that mimic the movements, and the camera was on the rig and filmed the footage in the background or in front of the fake lunar module. Here is a setup of the model under the snorkel lens. And there, I think it was a DAC camera. It was filmed in very low frame, so it's crappy, and it's possible the lunar rover was animated. Here are some examples from the early 1970s. This is Don Dykstra, who was a student of Douglas Trumbull. And in the summary I went over this. I find this extraordinary every time I see it. I find it extraordinary how real it looks, and how tiny the models were used to generate it. It just blows my mind. Look at this snorkel camera. This is it moving across a tiny fake road set and creating something incredibly realistic in this low-resolution footage. There's the rig, the camera rig. It's called motion control. It's used extensively in visual effects today, and this was used to create city planning or something. I don't know how much he got paid to do this, but it's an extraordinary setup. And the time it must have took to build these models, I don't know. I don't know how long it took the team to build and record this, but it's extraordinary nevertheless, especially when you get to the nature footage in the end. You see the mountain in the background. This is with atmosphere and everything. You can imagine with the moon set how realistic, and you made it 3 times as big as that. This is a flight simulator camera, sideways pointing at a fake landscape, and moved in real time based on the pilot's action. They actually used it for Apollo training. This is the moon surface, model moon surface. There's a camera that moves along it based on the decisions of the astronauts. And this is a lunar rover simulator. I went over this in the summary, but this really fascinates me. They actually had the same setup. It's just like a flight simulator, except for a rover. There it is. I believe the camera is upside down or sideways. It's hard to tell here depending on what they thought worked best. Here, a couple of astronauts coming to enjoy their simulation ride. How this helps them, I'm not sure, other than planning the ride and getting used to it. But if you look at the footage, it's truly amazing what's going on there. The camera is reaching, in basic ways, to the surface. The other thing to keep in mind is all of this is recordable, meaning not the footage generated, but the camera moves. That's the motion control. That's what motion control is. You create a camera view, re-record it in the computer, you can reproduce it again and again and again. And so you can turn the camera to the left, turn the camera to the right, turn it behind you, and do some passes. And you can do it frame by frame. You can do 1 frame every 2 seconds, 1 frame every 4 seconds, however it works best for you to generate the imagery. The camera moves forward, takes a new picture, moves forward, takes a new picture. This is another simulator. They call it the LOLA. This is footage generated from a model, and they have a camera rig set up. Although you'll see I speed it up. This is like their speed, and I sped it up so that we don't have to sit there and fall asleep. There, you just saw it speed up. You'll find when you look at the landing footage later, it's very similar to this when I speed it up. You know, this doesn't look as real as the other footage does, but they did a more sophisticated implementation. Here's that setup I show in the summary. Tracks, cameras on tracks, it's all computer controlled. It starts with a model and so forth. Here they are with their calipers. They like taking pictures with calipers on these things. And they've got their accurate mapping. They're making sure that the model matches accurately to the mapping because the astronauts are relying on it. They're the ones making these decisions that need to be completely oriented for their landing, right? And this is a simple mock-up of something on glass I showed because I found it a little funny. That's how they did it. They did it much more sophisticated for the hoax. This is huge. There's a man next to it. You can see it's a huge piece. Plaster of Paris, I guess. I'm not sure what it was made of. That's just what it looks like to me. But highly accurate model. And when we get closer here and see the fine detail that is in this thing, you start to see more and more craters. Look at all the subtle craters in there. This is all accurate. Look, they're showing how accurate it is. See, we're very impressed. But here is being used for the LOLA simulator, and it looks very similar to the footage captured by the Apollo camera on the official Apollo landing. And now look at the subtle detail. You can see craters and things. We will get close here. This is a model. We'll zoom in close. Look, there are tiny rocks, all kinds of subtle detail happening in this thing. And if you made the model 4 times as large, imagine the detail you can put in it. You could put sands on it, add a few fake rocks on it, the sand would move. Look at this huge set, a huge model rather, 2 guys at the bottom standing next to it. I don't know what this was used for, but look, it's an example of a big model. And then use the setup. This is the same space that they were using for the set. They wouldn't have room to fit that giant model world that they built. In some cases, I think the rover was moved on a giant hydraulic stand. They had a fake front setup with a camera setup. I don't think necessarily it was in view, but it was used to generate shadows on the surface. So here, I think these photos were generated from a DAC camera. You can see in the middle one, there's a shadow of the antenna and camera. Sometimes it's because the shadows, some because they're on a set. But I believe they had a rig to generate shadows, so that when they projected it on a screen in front of the simulator, it had a shadow to make you think they're really there. Here's another example you can see, but it's rare, right? All of these images, but they only have one shadow, so it's quite possible they take one frame at a time. It's just got a shadow in it. Fiber optics are used in the cameras. Possibly they had endoscopic kind of setup with the camera, and instead of doing this, like they did in Star Wars, you have these guys coming and going and animating. The camera animated. In fact, you'll hear Douglas Trumbull a bit describe how they did it on Back to the Future ride. I had no idea that they could do that, and no doubt he implemented something like that in the Apollo simulation, whatever they call the hoax. So instead of guys doing this, they had cameras, and maybe they had something in their bag of tricks. Move the antenna so that it projected the proper shadow. Here I am showing an example. This is footage generated by filming of the models, a computer model, but it's an example nonetheless. Here we are in the simulated ride in front of the footage with no movement. And now we're going to use the same footage, and we're going to add a very simple movement, kind of like we saw in the rover simulator. And there's the rig moving a little bit. That's what's generating the image at the top. And here we're going to add a little extra little move. We're adding pops and stuff. And here you'll see that extra movement. It's not added to the original footage. I have been doing these as separate so you can see them as separate. Here we have a loose camera, as if it's on a stand that's reacting to the movement of the rover. And you'll see how it all comes together. This is the basic movement, the left image at the top. And now we will add what I call gross movement, where it's all kind of moving in and out of craters. Now we have the smaller movement, and it's a little extra. And here's where they loosened up the camera a bit. It's on its stem, it's reaching to the rig, and now we're on the moon. It's pretty extraordinary how simple it is and how effective it is. And now you can even see the reflections in the antenna up there. I believe they probably had a 360-degree setup for any kind of reflections, and that's not that much more difficult. Let's look at the actual footage here. I'm not going to show it all to you, but you can see more in the appendix. It's quite extensive. I think it would be interesting in having someone go through and really nail down what is what. But I think that's, not necessary here. And this is why. There are a lot of things that landed on the moon, a lot of unmanned things. The rovers went pretty far. There are a lot of opportunities to see what the moon should look like. And when stitched together, I can tell you what the moon should look like. So those flipping through real quick are either low frame rate DAC or Hasselblad photos from the chest camera. So here, I stabilize these. It's amazing how unbearable it is to watch the actual footage. It'll drive you insane it's shaking so much. I minimized the shaking a lot here. It had to be done by hand because the tracker doesn't like tracking this crap. But you can see it looks very similar to what I just showed you in regards to the virtual set of the simulator ride. See that shadow on the lower right? This could be a setup. I believe this is a section of the set, the previous one, if you look at this clip. And when you look at the whole clip, I believe sometimes they mixed how they did it. Sometimes they filmed it with a model, sometimes they filmed it on a set. They used the same rover, actually, that was on a set. They put it on a rig. Up here it looks like it's on a set, but it's hard to tell. You don't see any shadows of the astronaut on the ground, the other astronaut sitting in the rover, and the reflections are just the landscape. So I think it's quite possible that this is faked footage, meaning they're not on a set. And this is all reacting to the motion-controlled camera that they have on it. There's nothing about this footage that says, the landscape, so it's actual. There's no detail in here, so you can't see the detail. It's all limited. The other thing about this footage is that It is transferred to HD. Thank you very much. It should be transferred into log, to digital format so that we can analyze it for ourselves. Perhaps somebody else could get that to happen. And there's a shadow on the ground. Either that was on a set, quite possible. They're kind of going in circles or actually done on a model. So the modules all landed on the moon? Well, they have footage of it. These were all captured models. I believe it was a model with sand on it, certainly where the module landed, and it was all filmed slowly, except for the landing part, when they had a simulator action, just like the simulator, and blasted sand. And after the sand cleared, they did a mixture with masks and stuff, which dissolves to the actual set. Practical, life-size set you see in the film of the astronauts walking around. Here we have Apollo 14 and landing on its model, and it's not going very far. You can see that it's a curved model. It is accurate to the curvature of the moon, so it's very accurate. It's very similar to the model we just looked at for the LRV. All the craters, same thing, highly accurate. Here's something interesting though. You can see some striation lines. I put some lines on to show you, well, the angle, and they look just like the mosaic lines, satellites flying over, around and around, catching images, and they put them together. And here you can see the striation lines. It's hard to avoid when that's your only reference when you build the model. Look here, it's very clear. Increase the contrast to make it a little more clear, but there they are. Striation lines are what they are. These are the mosaic images, and here we are coming in for a landing. It's all sped up compared to the real landing. It's in real time. And you can see the sand now. Fortunately, in 14, the sand did not obliterate the view so clearly, so they didn't have an opportunity to do a good blend. And the giveaway. The give is the crater shadows. They change, as well as the shapes of the surface a bit. The crater shadows is more obvious here. Now we're analyzing that. The camera is supposedly located in the filming through the triangular windows. I believe it's the one on the left of the door, in this view from the outside, and it's coming in upside down kind of. It's all odd, so I had to turn the image so that you can see, well, the reference. The frame. The framing is the reference. And here we're coming in. You can see the actual sand blasting, but you can always see the craters. The thing is, the two right in the middle there, you can see just above the middle, and the shadows have changed. Here they are, the shadows, so you can keep an eye on them. And see the two shadows there? It's pretty dark, and here the shadows are shallow. It's not so clear to the uninitiated eye, but for me, it is fairly obvious. Those are deep shadows, very dark, very clear. It's not just an illusion. And here it's just got a little shadow, and zoom in to make it a little more obvious. Now that's very detailed. Now I'll demonstrate how this was done. So here are the craters. We have the two examples of what appears not to be an illusion. Slight sun angle changes, right? In one, the shadows are really low in the crater, and the other, the shadows are higher in the crater. In fact, you see it all in the craters there, but not in the top one. You really don't see it because they change that quickly. It's just a soft map. It's just, I'm sure, covered with dust to hide it. So I go back and forth. You can see them all. The surface shifts a little bit because it doesn't match up. It's very difficult to have a scale model which is smaller, one life size, to match up. That's quite a feat, but it does accomplish the effect, right? Just look at all the other footage for evidence of that. Every other one, the other 5, the sand completely obliterates the view. And then when it clears, we're on the set. Maybe they claim this is gas distortion, rocket blast, but it doesn't quite work with me. There's a lot of distortions taking place which we'll review. If we look below over there, we can see how this was done. They had two different setups, all on computer, two different setups going on, model setup. The lighting is quite different the way they had it set up. And when the scene shifts, they're using the same model, the same setup, and shifted a little bit, so here's the difference. You can see the shadows are different, the gray area I shifted a little, just subtle, and how I blurred the model. Obscured by dust, right? This is a little more accurate to the differences. Now here the moon is blasted by dust, right? Fake sand, of course, on top of it, and used it as a mat. So they did all this by hand for the most part, but now I use it as a mat. You'll see the fluctuation. It's used to disguise the distortion taking place, and simply because they are spraying sand out of a nozzle at the bottom. Had this been real, the sand would still be lingering about. This is not what we are seeing here. There's another discrepancy here. That's because one was a model and one was a life-size. There's a change occurring here on the detail. I'm not quite sure what it is, as it fades in and then fades out again. But there is no reason for this thing to be changing like this. It's changing shape. I think Douglas Trumbull is likely the mastermind behind this. He was the 2001 Space Odyssey visual effects mastermind, and he had a lot of experience in this, simulating the moon and space stuff. His first job was with Graphic Films and working for Apollo, generating PR stuff for Apollo. To the Moon and Beyond is something he generated with Cinerama, and it was used as the technology backdrop. Here's some information about To the Moon. It's a large film format, really longer than other formats, and it's extraordinary what they did on Space Odyssey 2001. There is evidence that it was supported by NASA, and it was a kind of an R&D to figure out all the technology. They used it for the Apollo hoax. And it's also in the interest to see he worked for the Apollo program already, before he did 2001. Again, it was a large format with the use of a fisheye lens and immersive cinema. That is, immersive cinema before the Apollo program. So he was already interested in it. It's quite extraordinary how his career parallels the ability to do all of the special effects needed to pull off this hoax. Let's hear him tell us in his own words.
I'll get into it right away, and I'm going to take it pretty much chronologically, so I think it'll make a certain amount of sense. When I was just out of high school, I was going to be an architect, I thought, and I started taking courses in illustration and painting and mechanical drawing and engineering drawing and things like that. I became very fascinated with kind of science fiction illustration, and it was all multiplane photography, fisheye lenses projected into a dome theater, and photographed with fisheye lenses and wide-angle lenses projected with fisheye lenses into a kind of a planetarium dome theater. And the show was called To the Moon and Beyond. And Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke saw this show, which I had done all the illustrations for, which were part of the multiplane photography. And Graphic Films got a job to start doing some preliminary early design work for 2001: A Space Odyssey, which at the time was called Journey Beyond the Stars in a very early draft. This is one of my early pencil sketches for a kind of a lunar base. You can see some similarity here to, the horizon on the moon, the Earth in the distance, various kinds of lunar modules and stuff like that. An idea for a pod, which became like a pod in 2001. But I wanted to digress a little bit. So 2001, you have a little storyboard drawing. A lot of the storyboard drawings we work with are very simple, sketches almost, but you see shots in the movie, and then you see the moon bus, and that was one of my first tasks on 2001 as a young man. I was probably maybe 24, starting to detail these miniatures and trying to make them look photorealistic, even though they were just fiberglass models with not much detail. And we started figuring out how to put detail and painting. And actually, since I was an illustrator, I was actually painting with my airbrush right on the model to create different panels of texture and brightness and reflection and trying to make it look as big as we possibly could. And then I got involved in shooting some of these miniatures. Kubrick really got to like me and what I was able to do, and so I got into designing some of these shots like this, where each of these was a 1,000-watt light bulb out of a slide projector, and this was the painting back here, and this is the moon bus that's going to land, and it's mounted on this rod back here. It's kind of tilting up and down, has nitrogen coming through the nozzles of the supposedly jet engines or rocket engines to stir up all this dust, and we had to mount it on glass in order to superimpose one thing against another. So you get shots like this, shots like this. You can see all this little detail and stuff that I got involved in creating little, streaks of grease and who knows what to try to make it look real. This is working on the big stage, one of the big stages at MGM. That's the space station set over here and the moon bus set over here. This is the moon bus set being built. Several shots of that. I designed a lot of these moon terrains. I had a lot of discussions with Stanley about what we thought the moon was going to look like, because nobody knew. There hadn't been any satellites or anything that really had looked at the moon surface in any detail. And so this was kind of a Chesley Bonestell, rocky, craggy terrain kind of thing that he wanted. And I was actually going in another direction, which did not make the cut. And here's me working on my moon terrain, which I thought was, in fact, in retrospect, very much like what the moon is like. It's very rounded, very soft, very eroded by micrometeorite impacts, and not craggy at all. These are some early designs for the Jupiter sequence. The Discovery spacecraft went through a zillion different iterations. The Stargate was going to be a slot inside one of Jupiter's moons that they go into. This was actually a very early hypothetical rendering of what the pod might look like at a very early stage. This slot in one of Jupiter's moons was going to be another little universe down there that didn't belong in our universe, and they had to go down there. And these are like two pods looking down here. They're going to send little probes down. There's a whole bunch of things that were designed, written, experimented with, drawn, discussed, and deleted. This movie went through tremendous development. So the thing I'm talking about today is all the whole kind of creative process of how you tackle a problem, work on it, discuss it, solve it, change it, and try to come up with a new solution to make something on the screen that people have not seen before. So anyway, ShowScan was this 60-frame, 70-millimeter giant screen thing that was way better than Cinerama and way better than IMAX in 1975. The simulation ride was this whole idea of hydraulic motion base and a capsule with people inside, which I'll show you later, became the Back to the Future ride for me, which was a lot of fun. And then another ride called Cineride, which never came to pass, which was really cool, and I'm sure we're going to do this pretty soon, was projecting multiple ShowScan films in a dark ride situation, and you're in a vehicle. And we filmed these films knowing that the vehicle would be moving at 30 feet a second, or 30 feet a minute. And so we filmed it with the camera moving 30 feet a minute and projected these films into domes, and then had foreground sets that were all moving in perspective to the perspective shift in the movie. And it was all 60 frame, and it was so real that everybody believed that everything that they were seeing was happening in real time, including explosions, breakaway glass, mummies, monsters, you name it. It was really wild. We started developing special electronic 70-millimeter projectors that could run 60 frames a second electronically, did not have a mechanical Geneva movement in them. One of the things this ShowScan thing led to was an experimental film, which I'm sorry I can't show you, but we knew the size and shape of the screen, and so I devised this thing. I said, well, if we shoot in ShowScan and we project it in exact same scale as the theater itself, I'm going to do this illusion. And so we had this scene where we projected a really bad movie on the screen that was kind of a fake documentary, and we made everything go wrong that you could possibly think of. It goes out of frame, it goes out of focus, the film burns in the gate, it's just terrible, and it fails. Then the projectionist leaves the projection booth, goes around the theater, comes behind the screen, turns on a work light back there, because screens are perforated, you can see through them. If there was a light back there, you'd see the speakers behind the screen. So he does that, and so you see the speakers in there, there's this big roll-up door, there's a door he comes through, and he comes up to the audience and touches the screen, which is catching the light from these house lights, and starts talking to the audience, apologizing for screwing up the show. It looked absolutely real. It was indistinguishable from reality. And his feet are on the ground, and he's 6 feet tall, and it was all in scale to my theater. And heavyweight people like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and Coppola, everybody came to my screenings. And when I would get to this point, they would get up out of their seat and start leaving the theater, shaking my hand, say, Doug, whenever you get it fixed, give me a call. I'll see if I can get it on my schedule to come back. And it wasn't until they were off to the side of the theater they realized they'd been completely fooled. And this, to me, was a really important moment in movie history. And this little movie called New Magic has actually been requested by the Academy to be archived there. And I'm hoping we can get it digitally scanned so we can show it again in high definition. Now we're working on an entry-level version of this, which will enable film students and colleges to do this kind of thing very inexpensively. And I'm working with a guy named Scott Lismondi at Hollywood General Machining and building a zero-gravity boom out of a porta-jib components. And this is under construction in LA right now, and we're just about to test it right after Christmas. And it's a really cool thing. This whole little gizmo, I can't use the word gizmo, device is going to cost about $5,000 instead of the original one that cost $250,000. So I've also been experimenting with digital single lens reflex cameras, which are quite amazing. If you've ever shot with a Nikon or a Canon, I'm using the Canon 7D with some Zacuto attachments. It's a very inexpensive camera. It's shooting full high definition 1K by 2K 24 frame movies very inexpensively, and I'm having good results with it. And my next step is I'm going to tear this camera apart and pull the chip out and build it into a new camera that will be able to be 2 chips side by side for a integrated 3D camera. Now, in the world right now, the RED camera is the hot camera. It's not the only camera, but it's a good kind of mid-level priced camera, and I think we can start adapting this for 3D production as well, because the 3D cameras we're seeing these days are really cumbersome, awkward, and heavy, like the IMAX cameras have been and like the Cinerama cameras were. So we're in an early phase of 3D where shooting in 3D is a real pain in the neck, but it's going to get much better. Right now, I went to NAB just a few months ago in Las Vegas and saw all the latest 3D camera rigs. And I got to tell you, it's horrible because these cameras are clumsy, noisy, fat, heavy, obtrusive, hard to align. They create all kinds of horrendous post-production problems to composite 3D live action. And we're in our infancy of trying to solve a lot of these technical problems to try to make a whole new generation of 3D cameras and solve these problems so that shooting in 3D is not such a pain in the neck. I've been recently working with Terry Malick on Tree of Life. He won't let me talk about it. I think it's going to come out pretty soon. There's one shot I'll show you, just a little hint. There's me. There's a Phantom camera shooting at 1,000 frames a second in a vat of water. You can imagine how much paint or milk or whatever might have been in there. And we're designing one version of that film, which is called The Voyage of Time, which is going to be in IMAX theaters in about a year after that, which is going to be this spectacular space experience, probably the closest thing to 2001 since then. And so we've been studying IMAX theaters, geometry, screens, projection. And this whole digital virtual studio I'm working on, which I want to do with my next film, is to build a stage that's designed with the zero-gravity boom, and everything is designed around that technology to automate the lighting grid so that we can do rehearsals on this and pre-light scenes and come back into our stage and reshoot. I'm even, hypothetically designing what a studio might look like if you did a whole bunch of these stages. There's a lot of advantages of the zero-gravity crane, digital cameras, automated lighting, very limited sets, a very smaller stage, a smaller crew, faster shooting, increased production value, and lower costs. So there's a lot of benefits to working this way. So I'm working on this whole idea. I'm writing screenplays for this technology, and we hope to kind of clone this and make it happen all over the world. We have to get funding. I'm not going to go through this. It's more like a business presentation. It's okay if you call me a mad scientist.
So the question is, who is behind this? Well, to start with, there's Mission Control, but almost no one was behind this. They were fooled along with us. There were perhaps a few agents in there. The only people talking to the people on the moon were the astronauts themselves. They were the ones that did all of the talking to the supposed astronauts on the moon. And that's not a real moon, by the way. And I believe that they were in the suits in the footage that we see, and they've been lying to us ever since. And not everyone in this picture landed on the moon, but I believe they were all involved one way or another, and someone could investigate that further. But in Mission Control, there were astronauts there, and they were the only ones that were allowed to talk to the astronauts. This is a camera controller. He is involved too, because obviously he's not the one controlling the camera. I suspect that he was possibly or probably involved in the fake footage camera movement. Why not? So, what is NASA? Is NASA real? I believe it is actually an Intel operation with a fake front. Intel likes to do this. You can say it was infiltrated, but I believe it was designed to be fake. In fact, all of them are. The entire space program is a front. Such companies say, yes, we're here for humanity, and yes, we put people in space, but no, we're putting spy satellites over the planet, trying to control the planet. It's an age-old technique of owning the sky. Yes, we try to communicate with the heavens, but we are in communication with the gods. Apollo is supposedly the god of light. NASA is not. So without Apollo, what is NASA? Apollo isn't real. It's nothing but a ghost.